Yeah, they're gonna ring our doorbell and there'll be treats for everyone.
Ah, that sounds good.
Yep.
We are
Okay,
live.
ready, Carrie Ann?
Yes, we're live.
Wonderful. We are live now, so behave. All right. I am going to call my name is Julie Pierce. I am the chair of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. I'm calling the meeting for Wednesday, September 16th to order. And I would like to invite you all to please give your attention to the following short video.
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N2920, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should remute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. A 30-second warning will be provided. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the COVID-19 special notice for public comment guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Good job, Julie.
Wasn't that cool?
Yep, you stole it from MTCA bag, huh?
We did indeed, and I'm trying to get my city to do it because as any of you who've chaired a meeting know, you invariably stumble over something or you try to abbreviate it in a way and you mess it up. So this is just lovely. So
yes, it is.
And since we're going to be doing this for a while, I figured we better get that on the record. So good job, staff. Thank you to Convey for putting that together for us. And that makes the start of all our meetings just a little simpler. So the next item on the agenda is to determine that we have a quorum. So I'm going to ask Terry Ann to please call the roll.
Commissioner Arnrich,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Here.
Commissioner Glover,
Here.
Commissioner Haskew,
Here.
Commissioner Hudson,
Here.
Commissioner Kelly,
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell. I saw her.
I see her. She's just not paying attention.
I see her. She is present.
Here I am. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Romick,
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Geringer,
Here.
Chair Pierce,
Here.
Representative Allen, here, Representative Wilson,
Here.
Representative Orth.
Here.
Okay, everyone is present at the meeting.
Everyone's present. How about that? It must be September. All right, the next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I will ask all of you except for Newell Arnrich to please mute yourselves and follow along with the Pledge of Allegiance as Newell says it for us. Thank you, Newell.
Thank you. If you'll place your right hand over your heart and join me, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, too.
Thank you, Newell. I appreciate that. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Terry Ann, have we received any public comment?
We have not received any public comment and I don't see any hands raised currently.
I do not either, but I will ask one more time. Do we have any attendees who wish to make comment on any item not on today's agenda? I don't see anyone raising a hand. So we will close the public comment period. And the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our July 15th meeting. Are there any changes, comments, etc. from the board?
This is Kevin. Move approval.
Second Hudson.
Okay, I have a motion and a second from, Romick and a second from Hudson. All in favor, Terry Ann, please call the roll.
Commissioner Arnridge,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Yes.
Commissioner Glover,
Yes.
Commissioner Haskew,
yes,
Commissioner Hudson,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchoff,
Yes.
Commissioner Romick,
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Geringer,
Yes.
Chair Pierce.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Terry Ann. The next item is the consent calendar. Is there anyone who wishes to pull anything from the consent calendar for separate discussion? I don't see any hands waving. So
Move it. move
Pardon?
approval.
Second.
Okay, the approval was by Haskew, I think.
Yes.
Is that right? And
Yes.
second by Arnrich. I'm trying to see the whole screen at once, folks. All right. So Terry Ann, would you please conduct the roll call vote?
Commissioner Arnridge,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Yes.
Commissioner Glover,
Yes.
Commissioner Haskew,
Yes,
Commissioner Hudson,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchoff,
Back and forth. I'm just going to leave it on. Yes.
Commissioner Romick,
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Geringer,
Yes.
Chair Pierce.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, we are now on to our major discussion items. We have no major discussion items, but we do have some regular agenda items. And we actually have a new item for the agenda that was not seen in either of the two committees. And this is an informational item by Colin Clark and will be presented by BART staff to discuss their transit-oriented development work plan. So do we have an introduction by staff or do we just kick it off to BART?
Intro from staff. Good evening, Chair Pierce and Commissioners. I'm Colin Clark from the Planning Department at CCTA. I'm pleased to welcome staff from BART's Real Estate and Property Development Department, including the Transit-Oriented Development Program Manager, Abby Thorne-Lyman, and Principal Property Development Officer, Nicole Franklin, to co-present this informational item. Jurisdictions have the opportunity to provide input on the draft TOD work plan until December 15th. Now I'd like to invite Abby to begin the first part of the presentation.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out how to share my screen here. Let's see. Oh my, this looks different than I.
Should be right at the bottom in the middle.
Yeah, I got that. It just says select window or application you want to share. Usually it shows my files, so I'm trying to figure out.
You need to open your file first as though it was
Yeah,
ready.
It is
And then
open.
just click on the image. It'll be one of the options under share screen.
I'm not getting that.
Did you open your file? Is it
Yes, it is
PowerPoint?
open.
Open
Yeah.
your PowerPoint and then hit share screen. And then you'll get another
Yeah.
screen that shows icons of images.
Yeah,
Click on the one that looks like what you want.
it's not showing it. Normally, obviously we use Zoom a lot. I just, it's not showing that. Terry Ann, are you able to share my presentation for me? I'm getting a strange screen. I apologize. I'm not quite sure what I have done. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you for having us this evening. We're really delighted to be here. It has been almost 2 years since Assembly Bill 2923 was signed by Governor Brown back in 2018. And At the time, it was obviously a very controversial bill for those who may remember. This bill requires local jurisdictions with certain BART-owned property to rezone that property to support transit-oriented development. We have conducted a lot of work and a lot of outreach to your respective jurisdictions and others. We reached out to 22 jurisdictions, including those affected by AB 2923 and some who are not, such as Orinda, where the BART property, the BART parking lot is owned by Caltrans. And we've been talking primarily to staff. So this is the first time we've really done a substantive presentation to elected officials representing multiple jurisdictions with our final reports. So we are very excited to be here. I just wanted to pop up on the screen, BART's had a transit-oriented development program since 1993, really primarily focused first and foremost on increasing BART ridership, and more recently focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and addressing the housing crisis. So Taryn, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the legislature passed this law in 2018. It was not endorsed by BART. It was not authored by BART. And it requires rezoning of certain BART-owned property, that's developable BART-owned property within a half mile of existing stations, existing BART-owned property that BART owns. BART cannot go buy new property. And local jurisdictions have until July 1st, 2022 to rezone this property. Next slide, please. I popped up a link here to our technical guide, which we released. As we talked to jurisdictions, we heard two key messages. The first was this legislation was extremely confusing and needed some clarification. So we published a technical guide for zoning for AB 2923, which is a series of questions and answers that we had received from jurisdictions. And we did stakeholder meetings with planning directors and community development staff from our partner jurisdictions. And I won't dwell on what the zoning requirements are, because I want to focus primarily tonight on the second part of what we really heard from jurisdictions, which is a desire for greater clarity from BART on what BART owns that is affected and where BART owns this, and when BART might anticipate developing, and what our intentions were going to be around development. So if you could go to the next slide, please. The technical guide is really the key stakeholders and a target audience for this are staff at local jurisdictions, some of whom are very actively participating in rezoning BART property today. And so they're functioning as our, those jurisdictions that are engaged in a current rezoning effort are really our guinea pigs for making sure that we've given the information. What I really want to focus in on here is our approach. There was a lot of lack of clarity in this law. The law requires rezoning for certain heights, 5 stories, 7 stories, 12 stories, but most municipal codes zone in terms of feet. There were a lot of little instances of that. And so our approach to this has really been to be deferential to local jurisdictions' municipal codes. If you have a way of doing things already in your code, that is the primary way we would defer to that. If you do not have a way of doing that, BART must determine whether each jurisdiction has conformed its zoning come this July 1st, 2022 deadline. And we are really relying on the local jurisdictions to tell us that they have conformed based on their own interpretation. So we've tried to give as much information as we possibly could while respecting the fact that BART is not a zoning authority. We do not have the same capabilities, and we do not have extensive municipal codes. And so it is really up to each local jurisdiction to look in its own municipal code to come to recommendations. The next thing we heard from jurisdictions was distinguishing zoning from development. This is really important. The law legislates zoning. It does not legislate anything about development expectations. If you could go to the next slide, please. Jurisdictions may change the way they're, particularly in light of our resource constraints with COVID-19. Jurisdictions have to make tough choices about where to allocate resources and whether it is worth allocating those resources to rezoning BART property if there were already other priorities within the jurisdiction. So we really have been trying to emphasize that AB 2923 is a state law about zoning, but what happens in terms of the TOD project is really determined by BART and the local jurisdiction and is not affected by this law. And so because of that, we actually decided to publish a document that was not required by law, which is this next slide, if you could, the Transit-Oriented Development Work Plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to walk through this. I think there's a lot of technical aspects of AB 2923, and we have a lot of background material, but the TOD work plan itself is, I think, more interesting and more directly impactful, because this is actually when and where we intend to develop. So Nicole, do you want to take it away from here?
Can you see my screen properly? Sorry to jump in.
I see the notes version, but
Okay, let me, sorry.
better than what I was able to do. I don't know. What
Is that better?
Yes,
That's
there you
perfect.
go.
You got it,
Okay.
Terry.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I just swapped the view. Okay.
Nicole? Nicole, you're muted.
Sorry about that, everybody. I'm busy talking and you can't hear me. So I'm going to just quickly go over the TOD work plan that we worked with the local jurisdictions and got their input to come up with. The TOD work plan is a business plan that will guide BART's TOD work over the next decade. It's based on BART board approved policies, including the AB 2923 development principles, which I'll go over later in the presentation. The plan includes an update, a progress update on our 2025 and 2040 TOD performance goals, which the BART board adopted. It sets the TOD program priorities for the next 5 to 10 years, as I mentioned earlier. And it outlines the evaluation process that we use to prioritize our TOD sites. And it also forecasts some potential outcomes and benefits of the TOD projects that we plan to deliver during this time period. Next slide, please. As Abby mentioned, AB 2923 law focuses on the baseline zoning of BART property near stations. However, in order to give local jurisdictions, community stakeholders, and the development industry more guidance on how BART plans to deliver quality TOD projects, last month, the BART board approved these AB 2923 development principles. Firstly, the BART will prioritize TOD projects that are cost effectively implementing BART's TOD related policies. Therefore, BART will focus on sites that best meet our policies and performance standards, do not require costly infrastructure needs, and will help address the region's job housing imbalance. BART is also committed to partnering with local jurisdictions and communities to deliver regionally impactful TOD projects. We will focus on TOD projects in jurisdictions that support development. We want to work with people who want to work with us. We find that ends up with better TOD projects. And BART is committed to conducting meaningful engagement with local communities. Next slide. We will work with jurisdictions to incorporate local design standards, because the AB 2923 law is silent on design standards. And we will incorporate design standards that result in TOD projects that follow global best practices in design, access, and scale. BART TOD projects will honor local design requirements as long as those local zoning requirements support the highest densities and intensities. BART will foster safe, engaging, vibrant public spaces on and beyond BART's property. And the last development principle is we encourage sustainable mobility for residents, workers, visitors, and BART customers. Developers will be required to adhere to BART's transportation demand management requirements, which we just adopted our last BART board meeting. Next slide. Now, this slide represents BART's land use priorities. BART has identified 6 TOD sites in high opportunity communities that we will prioritize for affordable housing. And those are identified by, like, I call it the mustard circle there. We've also identified 14 sites that we reserve for commercial and other job generating uses, and that's the red and pink bubbles. In essence, we won't be entertaining any all residential projects at those sites. They will be office or mixed use projects. And then the remaining sites that have like the grayish hashtag, we're flexible, and we'll be working with local jurisdictions in terms of what's needed there and market conditions. Next slide. So now I want to kind of give an overview of our evaluation process for how we prioritized our TOD sites to set our TOD work program for the next 10 years. We prioritize these sites based upon market feasibility, local support in those jurisdictions, and lastly, infrastructure needs. For market feasibility, we identified sites that have market feasibility for both residential and commercial development. We define local support as jurisdictions with zoning adequate to support the highest feasible density on BART land, that recently conducted community engagement process and have anti-displacement tenant protection laws in place. And then lastly, we prioritize sites that will have minimal impact on BART operations, low parking replacement needs, and no extraordinary structural requirements. Next slide. And this chart, which is also in the TOD work plan, which is on our website, this chart basically summarizes what our work plan is for the next 5 to 10 years. Firstly, we will focus on completing the 11 projects that are currently underway. So in that top line where it says current pipeline, these are already projects that are in some stage of development, and we're going to focus on those until we get those completed. By 2025, we will advance affordable and mixed income housing projects for development in high opportunity and high displacement risk areas. And that's that second box. And as you can see, we will only be focusing 1 or 2 sites per year, not all 6 that you see there. We'll also, in the next tranche, work with local jurisdictions to help them fulfill their RHNA housing goals. And then we'll advance sites that will produce high quality jobs. And we're in it for the long haul. So even if a site currently, for example, Hayward or Warm Springs doesn't have a market today, we're still dedicated or committed to bringing job generating uses to those sites. Next slide. So continuing our TOD program could be an important part of the recovery effort following the pandemic by addressing the housing crisis, offering living wage jobs in the construction industry, and offering an increase in local property tax revenue and diversifying BART's revenue base. This work plan includes an analysis, the work plan that's on the website includes an analysis of these potential economic benefits. And some of the findings are shown in this chart here and also on the following slides. And I'm gonna just go through 1 or 2 of the slides and kind of talk to you about the projected economic benefits. Karen, can you change next slide? For example, every home built on BART property will generate 4.5 jobs in California. For every 1,000 square feet of commercial space that we build, it will result in 1.3 jobs. And then 62, and this is key, 62% of those jobs are middle skill jobs, requiring on-the-job training rather than a college degree and still offering a living wage. Next slide. Again, as we talked about earlier, as we try to recover from the pandemic, helping local jurisdictions with their budget. Currently, BART's land is exempt from taxes. However, when we enter into a ground lease or otherwise put development on our sites, the developer has to pay possessory interest tax. And as you can see, here are some projections of property taxes that it will generate from the development on BART property. Next slide. And that's, we're also looking, not right now because we have the pandemic, but after the pandemic, once we do our, build our TODs, we believe that it'll support, add additional ridership. Next slide. Now this concludes our presentation. We invite you to review our draft AB 2923 tech guide and the TOD work plan on our website. We'll be accepting comments on the work plan through December 15th. We're here to answer any questions that you may have. If any board member has a specific question or comment about AB 2923 or the TOD work plan that you'd like to discuss in more detail, feel free to email myself or Abby, and we're happy to set up a meeting with you to further discuss those items. So that concludes staff's presentation, and thank you for your time, and we look forward to any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Nicole and Abby. That was a very fast run through of some really complicated stuff. So I'm going to call on Dave Hudson. I think he's got a question. He's waving a hand.
Yeah, Nicole, I actually did listen. I've been listening all day. You said possessory tax. Who gets the tax? And what goes to the city where the impacts are from all this construction?
So the possessory interest tax is just like a property tax, because currently BART property is exempt from paying property taxes. And so when we enter a ground lease or otherwise dispose of property and it's developed, I think with the exception of affordable housing, if it's market rate housing, it goes on the city's, the county tax rolls, just like property taxes.
But we have agreements, the cities and the county, what the breakout is. Is the money coming to the city or is it coming to BART? Because I mean, there's going to be a lot of traffic there where normally cities would be hitting fees up front or collecting for the impacts of this development. And I'm just having a hard time for whatever reason, get my hands around how the impacts on the city are somehow getting back to the city.
I'll turn it over to Abby because
okay.
I think she has a.
I probably asked it for Newell. How should I ask that question?
Well, what the question is there are every local project built in all of our jurisdictions. We have regional impact fees. We have local impact fees for transportation, et cetera. When these projects develop, let's say in any of the 6 BART stations and eBART around those stations, are those fees charged? Who is it getting the building permit fees? Who's doing processing? Because the legislation's so vague, but the property is physically in the jurisdiction of one of those cities. But right now, if BART does work on their property, you don't talk to anybody, you don't ask permission, you don't pay a fee to anybody. So who is going to pay those fees?
When BART is conducting a private development, we're entering into the agreement with the developer, they are subject to all of the impact fees that a local jurisdiction has adopted. And they're collected as normal. They still have to seek, and the developer still is required to seek entitlements through the city, just as any development on private property would be. In addition to that, the Alameda County assessor collects, the only reason it's different than a standard property tax is because BART's policy is to prioritize ground leasing its property. So it's just because we don't sell a property, otherwise it would just transition as a normal property tax. But instead the Alameda County, the county assessor, you tell where I've been working, the county assessor collects the possessory interest tax, which is the equivalent property tax, and it's allocated per the rolls.
That
So
includes school fees, school bonds, all of those that affect all
yeah,
of it.
any impact fee that would apply to a private development would apply to a private developer working on BART's property.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, other questions? Wave a hand if you've got another
I
question.
actually had a Newell question. I was hoping Dave. Yeah.
He was doing mine.
Yeah, so the question is, Abby, and as you pointed out, and this is BART does not have general plan authority, so you can't zone, you can't do anything. So how does this work? The city says thanks, but no thanks. How is that resolved?
Yeah, so the way that the AB 2923 is written, the BART board had until July 1st, 2020 to adopt zoning standards that govern the height, residential density, floor to area ratio, and car and bicycle parking minimums and maximums. The law set minimum thresholds that the BART board could not go below. So the BART board could adopt higher standards, but not lower standards. So staff recommended to the board a year and some change ago not to adopt standards because the standards that were set in the state law were fairly substantial already. So jurisdictions have until July 1st, 2022 to conform their zoning for BART-owned property to those 4 standards. You can have other things, setbacks and shadow planes and open space requirements, but fundamentally the law governs only those 4 standards. If a jurisdiction does not rezone to conform with the law by that point, those 4 zoning standards shall become the zoning for the property. That's, I'm quoting that last part to you.
Yeah.
So some jurisdictions, as we've talked to jurisdictions, some have said, thanks, but no thanks. We will let whatever happens to us happen. And so it will play out in the next couple of years. So we'll find out. But that's, so it's sort of, there's a default situation if a jurisdiction does not do anything.
So the last question I have is, and Nicole mentioned as well, you both have, but I just want to be clear, BART doesn't build anything in terms of these developments. You're just the paper, you own it, you want a ground lease, follow those standards. So if the local jurisdiction does all that processing, but to be clear, you don't have monies to build anything other than you're supposed to be doing. You have restricted monies, which is only for your infrastructure to support BART and the operations. So when you say building housing, you are not building anything, just to be clear. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We are limited to the staff you see before you and our counterparts, and we are the facilitators of a process with a private developer. And it is
So
their
you're-
responsibility to get entitlements and do the engagement and build the thing.
So it might be good when you're talking, because cities get caught in this, that even though the state requires us to have zoning capacity within our general plans for affordable housing, things like that, we don't build housing. Now, 1 or 2 of us have some deferred monies and we act like we're in the housing business, but the fact is we're not. So it'd probably be good that you and representing BART also say the same thing. It says, we're a facilitator. We have property, here's the zoning that's available, and we want to facilitate that. But I think it's important to the taxpayers to know you are not building the housing, because then that means you're taking money from some other pot that you shouldn't be doing. So just as a clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Luella.
Yeah, Walnut Creek is one of your little gray circles. And we have a substantial BART surround already being built. Does that mean we are worried about this, or is there some other property we don't know about that we should be paying attention to? What's the situation?
Yeah, Walnut Creek is subject to an existing option agreement and lease, and for that matter. It's sort of done already. I think what we have determined working over the last couple of years is that it's in an existing agreement already. There's no addition. We're not talking about additional land. There's a couple of surplus properties, but we've determined that the AB 2923 does not apply to those properties. We included it, however, because it's still only in an option. There's a large portion that's still in an option to a developer.
Okay.
Just the law was going to require us to include it anyway, and we wanted to make sure we were clear about our intents, which was to be, flexible. Should something transpire between now and the time that last phase of the development is built.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for our BART friends? I would invite Deborah, if you have any comments you want to make, to go ahead and comment as well. You are, after all, our BART representative.
Thank you, Julie. No, I think staff covered most everything that we intended for you to hear. Unless someone has a question for me, I don't have any other comments except for one thing, that there is sometimes money that is expended to transit money that is expended on behalf of future TOD programs with respect to some of the infrastructure that is done well in advance, preparing lots for future development. And sometimes those are plaza redevelopments and things like that. So I don't know that it's entirely true that no transit money is spent on facilitating the development. In addition to that, there are revenues that are lost, and there is a whole analysis that is done on every project on how much revenue is lost from the parking asset by essentially destroying the parking asset and replacing it with a ground lease revenue asset. So sometimes those are winners and sometimes those are not as much winners.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. Okay, I see no other hands raised. Is there anyone in our audience who wishes to make public comments?
Representative
Amy
Ward.
was trying to talk.
Amy, you got a.
Sorry, I can't figure out on my computer how to raise my hand. So I
You did it right.
thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that presentation. I know many of us were involved in the as this bill moved through the legislature, and I think to Newell's point, one of the important things that is included in that bill was the recognition that cities, these development, all the fees that are generated through real estate construction, the mitigation, transportation, schools, parks, and the property tax was vitally important to the local governments as these projects were moving forward. It was very interesting to see the map of the various stations. And as you well know, all of you have BART, how the jobs housing balance is something that's of great concern to Contra Costa County. Our residents commute the longest distances. We have the largest percentage of people that commute out of the county. And one of the concerns with this bill was that it will reduce the ability to do commercial development. And obviously we have several developments, just looking at Walnut Creek and Pleasant Hill, where we have a wonderful combination of jobs, offices, as well as housing, within just a very short walking distance to BART. So, I saw that map, which was very encouraging, but is BART open to sort of considering this as it evolves, that there may be increased demand, for example, to locate commercial, office properties in some of these locations? Is there some flexibility with this plan, particularly looking at in Contra Costa County down the road?
Absolutely, there's flexibility. And I think that's why we tried to show, as we thought about the information and feedback we'd received from jurisdictions about where they wanted to see office development, we kind of did this, that there's places that want to see it where there's absolutely no market for it today, but we're looking at 100 years. We're looking at this as we only get one shot.
Right.
And so that's why we kind of we're open to the idea, and our intent is to refresh this plan every couple of years as market and economic conditions change. And really, and one of the board adopted sort of directions that we received in August was to really work on how we can do a job generating strategy for the East Bay. So that's the next step for us.
Wonderful. That is so wonderful to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay, this presentation, as far as I can tell, was not in our packet. So can we ask Terry Ann to please send that to all of us so that we have that for reference? I think that would be very helpful for all of us to be able to read through that. Again, probably a little bit slower. Wonderful. Thank you, Abby and Nicole, for being here. And thanks to Colin for bringing that presentation to us. We appreciate that. The next item is an action item, and Tim Hale is going to discuss the mutual responsibilities of the partners in developing the Innovate 680 project. Tim, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Tim Hale, the Deputy Executive Director for Projects at CCTA, and I'm here tonight to seek your approval on the Memorandum of Understanding between Caltrans MTC and CCTA for the Innovate 680 program. And I also wanted to provide just an update on what we have been doing on the Innovate 680 program as far as after we hired our strategic development consultant and all the other consultants we've been working with on all those several projects. So I do have a presentation, and I'll bring that up. So just as kind of a refresher, the Innovate 680 program has been our 7-prong approach to relieving congestion on I-680. And all of these strategies combined were basically a formation of mini goals, as well as several reports and studies that were done in the corridor. And so what we did is we took these strategies and basically formulated 6 projects that we've been advancing as part of the Innovate 680 program. And I wanted to kind of just give a quick update on where we're at with each of the projects. For the Express Lanes project, we just had a public scoping meeting for the environmental document, and we're also evaluating a number of alternatives along the corridor, especially at the State Route 24 interchange, to reduce or close the gap at that interchange. The part-time transit lane project, we've been working closely with Caltrans and CHP on coordinating some of the issues and challenges associated with that project, as well as developing the draft concept of operations. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means later in the presentation. The automated driving system grant, we are currently in the process of scoping that with our partners after we received the notice of award from FTA, the Federal Transit Administration. The advanced technology project, we are also developing the concept of operations and coordinating with Caltrans on an adaptive ramp metering project, which we'll probably be bringing some more information about that in the near future to the authority board for input and comment. The Shared Mobility Hub project, we've just completed developing a visioning white paper of what we envision of this network of shared mobility hubs along the 680 corridor provides seamless travel. And then we are also developing a concept of operations and system engineering documentation for the Mobility as a Service grant that we received last year. And so you hear the word concept operations. So we're really looking at planning and developing really the systems of systems along the 680 corridor. And to really—
Tim, is there any way you can enlarge your slides on the screen?
Yeah, which slides?
Tim, your presenter's view is in front of the slide, so you maybe go up to the display settings and try swapping it.
Okay.
Display. Tim can do that.
Okay, Tim, yeah, if you would do that.
Tim has to do that.
There you go.
There we go. That helps.
You can see this slide, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I see. Okay, I must have shared it the wrong way then. Okay.
Yeah, the other one was on top of it.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay, so my apologies.
No problem. You're younger than I am.
Start over.
So the corridor partnership that we've formed among all the agencies along the corridor, we've been doing and coordinating that through a governance structure that we formed that's memorialized in this memorandum of understanding. And so today we're mostly talking about a relationship with Caltrans and MTC and the authority. But as you know, a project like this takes a number of partners, especially with our local jurisdictions, to really develop these projects along the corridor. And so this is the governance structure that we have formed and be implemented along for the Innovate 680 program. And I'm not going to go through the entire structure, but today I'm really focused on that top blue band where the executive steering committee, the program leadership team, the policy advisory committee, and the technical advisory committee. That's really what this MOU does, is really memorialize that structure between those 4 entities. The executive steering committee really is just the really policy and financial advisory board for the entire program, and really the ultimate decision makers when we have some issues or challenges or funding in the program. The program leadership team is really essentially made up of the deputies from Caltrans as well as MTC and CCTA. The executive steering committee is formed by the executive director, Randy Iwasaki, as well as the director of Caltrans, Tony Tavares, and then Andy Vermeer, the deputy for project delivery at MTC. And the PLT is made up of me and my peers. And then the policy advisory committee is actually made up, that was designated by the regional transportation planning committees, one elected official from each of the local jurisdictions along the corridor. And similarly, at the staff level, the technical advisory committee that represents those local jurisdictions. And so the way this works is the policy advisory committee and the technical advisory committee is really an advisory body. And so as we're developing concepts and strategies and developing these projects, really it starts from a bottoms up approach. Our corridor management team, which primarily consists of all our consultants, goes up to the strategic development team. And that's where we start strategizing and start deciding how do we actually implement and get decisions made on policies and issues. And we will decide which direction it goes. But the ultimate decision-making authority is within that left column with the PLT and the executive steering committee. And the MOU memorializes this entire relationship. So since then, the partners have been amenable and gracious enough to be able to work together closely and implement the program, even though we've been negotiating and developing this MOU. And so since then, we've had 2 policy advisory committee meetings, 5 technical advisory committee meetings, primarily to talk about the concept of operations, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then 3 program leadership team meetings. So as you know, Innovate 680 is a performance-based program. And so through this performance-based program, we basically develop these goals. I won't read all of them. We develop these goals to really help guide the development of the projects and strategies as part of Innovate 680. And so what we did is we looked through these goals and actually identified which of the projects, which are on the top of this chart, and the goals, which are on the left of this chart, which of these goals apply to the individual projects. And then based on that, we identified metrics. I know there's a lot of text here, but we identified the metrics that we would actually measure the performance of each of these projects relative to these goals. And then we look for similarities between all of the projects and goals. And these are actually the final set of performance metrics that we are actually using to measure the success of the Innovate 680 program as we continue to implement the program. So I want to talk a little bit about what a concept of operation is. And because Innovate 680 is really intended to be this systems of systems in the corridor, we need to make sure we have a good plan of attack for a concept of operations. And so really the concept of operations intended to really bring all of our stakeholders together, really make sure we build consensus among the issues, the challenges, perspectives, policies in the corridor. And we basically have outputs that go out for review by the technical advisory committee, by the policy advisory committee, to receive final input approvals on specific policies that we'll be bringing to each of the bodies within the governing structure. And so what we have is it's a program level concept of operation that basically ties together all the different projects together. And so the dark blue items are basically concept of operations that are under development, that are still to be yet prepared, or under development, I'm sorry. And then the light blue are actually ones that are still need to be developed. And so each of the projects will have their own project specific concept of operations that will tier off the program concept of operations. And so I wanted to kind of share why that's kind of important with this Innovate 680 program and kind of give you a scenario that we've been kind of using to demonstrate this. So if in the Innovate 680 program, if you were going to open up your mobility demand phone application and look at your travel options, look at your cost options, you're basically planning, scheduling, and paying for your trip, you would then call upon or hail a shared autonomous vehicle that picks you up at home. And then that shared autonomous vehicle would go to a shared mobility hub to pick up additional passengers. And then you would travel along these local streets, probably under some sort of signal priority system, to get you to your destination. And then once you arrive at your destination, you're dropped off. And so in order to really enable this to happen, you have to have a system that enables it. And so these are some of the boxes. I won't go into each of them, but the orange boxes highlight the subsystems that are necessary to enable each of the steps in the scenarios. And so as you can see, you have to have a complete systems of systems, and it's a very data intensive program. And so data is very essential in making sure we have standards and good lines of communication between these strategies to really enable this scenario so that we have a seamless experience for the user. So with that, we've had 6 technical advisory committee meetings, primarily talk about the concept of operations. And through that, what we have been learning is talking about how do we actually operate a system like this? How do we work together with our local jurisdictions? As well as we talk about critical issues that we want to elevate both to the policy advisory committee or to an executive steering committee. And so we're actually in the process of scheduling one-on-one meetings with all our local partners. These first 6 meetings were primarily introductory topics of all the different aspects of Innovate 680. And now we're scheduling one-on-one to get more input, more detailed input, will lead into more development of the concept of operations. One exciting thing of the Innovate 680 program, Lindsay Willis, our Director of External Affairs, and our consultant Convey have been working on this. And this is really, really interesting. So what we're doing is doing a formal travel behavior study for the Innovate 680 program and really using this as a tool to get good input get good data to be able to really drive the development of these strategies, especially based on the current situation that we're on with the COVID-19 pandemic. This is turning out to be even more valuable to be able to go out to the public and understand how are these projects going to be, how can we better improve these projects to really serve the needs of the users in the corridor. And that's really done in 3 steps. The first step is doing a landscape analysis and essentially synthesizing existing data and research relative to all of our projects. And then we do a survey to really get more direct input from the users along the corridor. And then we have intervention recommendations. And essentially what that means is how do we make our projects better? So this is the progress that we've made so far. We have completed the landscape analysis for 4 of the projects. We're getting ready to distribute the user analysis in late this year. And then we'll complete the landscape analysis for some of these other projects for the Express Lane Completion Project, the Advanced Technology Project, and the ADS project. And then we would come up with recommendations to improve these projects. And then the other thing that Lindsay's been working on is developing really a slogan and campaign around the Innovate 680 program, which is Imagine the Possibilities. And so we've been developing materials, public-facing materials that we've been sharing both to the public through the Express Lane Completion Project and the public scoping meeting we just had. We also are developing the website for all of these projects to be able to have real-time input or near-time input on how these projects are performing. We're also developing a program brochure or newsletter. This is the new newsletter that we plan on distributing on a quarterly basis to get updates to the public and to our commissioners of what's happening in the Innovate 680 program. We also develop content and material to be able to really have consistency along all the deliverables and documents in the Innovate 680 to really set it, to really let it set itself apart from the other projects that we might be working on with other stakeholders. Project fact sheets, etc. And then we just really came up with a really neat, innovative tool to really do a virtual public scoping meeting to get input from the public. It was very well done, very well received. And so we plan on some of the next milestones as we plan on releasing the environmental document for the Express Lane Completion Project in early 2021. And so that's another public-facing milestone as part of the program. And so with that update, I'm seeking authorization for the chair to execute the MOU of 80.0901 between the authority, MTC, and Caltrans. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Wow, that was a big bite. That's terrific. Okay, Dave, I see you waving.
I really like that, Tim. I don't call it a landscape analysis. I call it a landscape evaluation when I take the day off to go golfing, but I'm going to start using LSA. Yeah, I really like that, especially the quarterly newspaper. I don't call it newspaper, but I think we ought to even go one step further and see if we could get more into some of the things that CCTA has accomplished. We found out you just can't go out to a ballot and do it in 60, 90 days, whatever. It just, that was ugly in my neck of the woods. And I think the bigger part of the reasoning that is somewhat touched on, but isn't really elaborated on in the presentation are the timeframes, when the key results will show that you've got it. I know in my city, the people were really high on that autonomous vehicle. Now it's like, where is it? When's it coming? Is it still there? And you really have to keep it hot and the front of people's minds, because right now everything's COVID negative and this and that. But if you could hit them with something that you're doing something with Innovate, example, we're going to have a bus on shoulder demonstration, March 2021, County Connections going to run every 15 minutes from San Ramon to Walnut Creek or something like that, and actually do it. It goes a long ways. And that's the one thing I think that's missing right now, at least in my neck of the woods.
Okay.
Newell?
I was just going to add to this. We looked at, Julia and Teresa and others, we looked at this in a lot of depth at APC. What's extraordinary about this is that this is the first of its kind. Everybody's talked about this for years. This is the first. So it's incredibly complicated because it's a performance-based solutions. It's not building a road. That's easy. It's a long list of interconnected things There's going to be new technologies that will emerge from this. There's technologies out there that will be modified to make this fully implementable. And the world's going to be watching this. So one, it's really exciting. Two, it is complicated. But I have to tell you, I just think our staff is so farther ahead of anybody else I've ever seen talking about this. And the organization, the structure, just, you know, your head falls over backwards. But they're on it, and I think this is exciting. And, you know, I'd be proud to move this item.
All right, we got a motion. Do we have?
Second before Luella.
What's that?
Second Hudson before Luella can get off of mute.
All right, I'm going to ask quickly if there's any public comment. We don't really have a whole lot of public with us in the meeting, but if you are, physically wave your hand, because we're all panelists here, and so you don't have a raise hand feature. I don't see anybody raising a hand. Okay, any other board members want to make comments before we have Terry Ann call the roll? I don't see anybody waving. Terry Ann?
Commissioner Arnrich,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Yes.
Commissioner Glover,
Yes.
Commissioner Haskew,
Yes.
Commissioner Hudson,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchoff,
Yes.
Commissioner Romick,
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Geringer,
Yes.
Chair Pierce.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Wonderful, thank you. Next item on the agenda is COVID-19 impacts on Measure J revenues, project evaluation and ranked list. Hisham, the wizard with the numbers, is going to give us the update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to present this item. I do have a presentation I want to share with you, and I'm going to cut my video because my connection is not stable. So let me know if you can see it and hear me. Are we good?
We're good.
You can
All right.
put it in full screen. There you
There
go.
you go.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So in light of all the uncertainty COVID-19 brought to our Measure J revenue forecast that we used in the strategic plan, the board, you chose to focus on the things that we can control to prepare us for the worst case scenario. No one can control our future revenues. We don't know how they're gonna look, but there are certain things we can do. And the three things that we can control are Measure J spending. We have control over some of the non-Measure J fund sources that we end up programming, like the STEP. We have control on how to spend our future Measure J funds, as little as they may be. To control our Measure J spending, we temporarily suspended the appropriation of Measure J funds to 32 local Measure J projects. And also we halted work on a number of CCTA managed projects to conserve our Measure J funds. To reduce the demand on our Measure J, basically the board, you directed us to look for potential STEP fund exchanges that could allow us to advance some of the project with non-Measure J funds without having to use our limited Measure J funds. And on the last item that we control on how we spend our future Measure J funds, you directed us to develop an allocation plan, which is basically the subject of this presentation. The allocation plan will guide our future Measure J appropriations, and by directing whatever little Measure J funds we may end up having that leverage the most state and federal funds to projects that leverage the most in state federal funds, we are ensuring that we are getting the biggest bang for the buck, especially during these down economic times. So by working on the things we can control, we are hopeful that we can minimize the impacts of COVID-19. So with that as a background, today I'll be talking to you about the first step in a multi-step process that will eventually allow us to develop the allocation plan, which is the prioritization of the remaining Measure J funds. I will be presenting two lists to you today. The first one is the local projects in Measure J that we suspended appropriation to. And the second one is the CCTA managed projects. I want to emphasize that we did not score these projects based on their merits or benefit cost ratio. All of these projects are important to us. That's why they had Measure J funds on them in the first place. The only reason we are scoring these projects and putting them in priority order is because we need to have a plan if it turns out that we don't have enough Measure J to do all of them. Until we have an updated revenue forecast and run it through our financial model, we really won't know how much Measure J we can appropriate and how many of these projects on the lists will be funded. The forecast could indicate that we have enough money to do all of them despite COVID-19, or it could show that we cannot afford to appropriate any more Measure J funds to these projects. I just want to say that any local projects on this list that don't get their Measure J funds will become the authority's priority in the future to fund from other sources, like potentially stimulus funds or OBAC-3 funds and others. Every 2 years, as you know, we update our strategic plan to ensure that our expenditures by the end of Measure J don't exceed our revenues. A year ago, the board adopted the 2019 strategic plan, which reduced our revenue forecast by $136 million compared to the prior strategic plan, the 2016 strategic plan. We were anticipating a slowdown in the economy, and as a result, we ended up deprogramming about $96 million in funding for the projects. The big question now is whether that reduction is enough to address the impacts of COVID-19. And you can see in this chart, despite the shutdown between March and June, our revenues in fiscal year 20 declined only by 3.2%. We were anticipating that we're gonna have only 80.5 million. The actual number came in about a month ago. That was close to $93.5 million, which is great news. And in fact, if you look at the chart, the solid line shows our actuals, and actually in the past 2 years, our actual revenues exceeded our projections in the strategic plan. So with that great news, I don't think anyone thinks though that we are out of the woods. Our fiscal year 21 budget, it's still about $16 million lower than what we projected in the 2019 strategic plan. And we still have 14 more years to go in Measure J. This chart, which is based on the fiscal year 21 budget that you approved, it shows the range of possibilities for the future. It basically compares a V-shaped recovery to the economy to a wide U-shaped recovery. As you can see, a V-shaped recovery means the loss will be only minimal, maybe around $20 million over the life of Measure J. Let's hope that's what happens. Under the U-shaped scenario, where it takes us 7 years to get back to the levels before COVID-19, under that scenario, we could lose about $300 million. And under that scenario, we know for sure that we could not afford to appropriate any funds to the projects, and some of the programs will end up being impacted. And this slide is just meant to show you the uncertainty we're facing. That's why we need to get our revenue forecast done by experts in the field, like HDL. And we're hoping to have a revenue forecast to present to you sometime in November. When we issued the bonds to accelerate projects in Measure J, there was an understanding that the debt service on the bonds, which is shown in the black line on this chart, will not impact the programs. It will always stay below the red line that you see here, which is the project's portion of our revenue, the 42.5%. If the worst case scenario happens and our revenues drop significantly, and we don't reduce our project expenditures now and build some cash reserves, we may not be able to protect the programs in Measure J. Some programs will definitely be impacted. Hopefully we will not have the worst case scenario and our revenue forecast will be rosier than what we think. But I just want to convey the point that this is like having a mortgage on your house. It doesn't go away if your income goes down. Unless you cut your expenses and have enough money in your savings account, you may end up losing the house. So that's what we're trying to protect against. Your action in May basically allowed us to slow down our Measure J expenditures. When you adopted Resolution 2009P, this basically bought us time to figure out the COVID-19 impacts on our revenues. In addition, that resolution also directed us to temporarily suspend appropriations to the local projects, the 32 projects I mentioned, as well as suspended work on some of the CCTA managed projects that don't have other funds at risk. In addition to suspending appropriations, you directed us to start building a reserve by putting any savings we get from Measure J projects we're working on, like the Southbound 680 project that just opened, to put that in reserves to cushion future impacts of revenue declines. We anticipate at this time, between the different projects we're working on, we could have up to $4 million in savings. The board also delayed the future calls for projects for the TLC and pit bike programs until we complete the next update to the strategic plan. We want to make sure we have the funds before we start spending them. And back in June, you approved the principles to develop the allocation plan, and they're listed on this slide. In general, the principles favor projects that are shovel-ready and leverage a lot of state and federal money. By directing whatever little Measure J funds we have to the projects that leverage the most state and federal funds, we are ensuring these funds are not lost to Contra Costa County and that we're stimulating the economy during these bad times. Based on the principles you approved, the staff developed the criteria you see in this slide to score the projects. A project gets the maximum score if it needs Measure J as a match for state and federal money, has more than $10 million in state and federal funds that can start construction by January next year, and is part of a larger project that is dependent on it being completed. That fourth category actually didn't play a role because none of the projects qualified for it. So it's mainly the three that played a role in the scoring. And to ensure that we are consistent in our methodology, transparent to the sponsors, and using the latest project information, we actually asked each agency that had a project on the list to give us up-to-date information on their projects before we did the scoring. When we had ties, which we had many of them actually, we basically used the amount of the federal and state funds at risk as a tiebreaker. The more the project had in federal and state money, the higher it was ranked. A summary of the scoring is shown on this slide. It's also the full table. If you want to see all the details, they're included in attachment A in your packet. A total of 32 projects were evaluated. Approximately $43 million in Measure J appropriations will be required to fully fund this list. The top 14, however, the top 14 projects shown on this list require about $11 million out of the $43 million in Measure J funds. And if we manage to fund them, they will leverage approximately $54 million in state and federal money. So it's pretty significant amount. The TCC reviewed the scoring criteria and scored list at their meeting on August 20th, and they did recommend approval. They thought the approach was reasonable as well as the results. We actually, in the last 10 days after APC, I also presented this item to SWAT TAC, Transplant TAC, and WIC-TAC TAC, and they didn't have any comments. Now we plan to go to their boards in the next couple of months. This is the continuation of the list. And this slide also shows the end of the list. And we anticipate updating this list every 4 to 6 months in order to reflect changes in projects funding. For example, some projects may go out and get other funds from the state or the feds, which will bring them up in ranking. Others may give up on Measure J and decide to do their projects with other sources, so they'll end up dropping from this list. So we need to be looking at this list every 4 to 6 months to reflect these changes. I also want to emphasize again that, you know, these projects are all important to us. We didn't score them based on their merits or benefit cost ratio. The only reason we're doing this is because we don't think we have enough Measure J to do them all, and we want to prevent the loss of other leveraged funds. And again, the projects that don't get Measure J funding basically will become our priority to fund from future sources. We end up programming like the stimulus funds or OBAG 3. I don't see us issuing any future calls for projects until these lists are funded. On a parallel track, besides the local projects, we actually reviewed and scored the CCTA managed projects that have funding shortfalls. There were 13 of them. We used similar scoring criteria that looked at other funds at risk and the amount of shortfall in the project, as well as other funding related factors that you can see in this slide. When we had ties, basically we used the amount of other funds on the project, non-Measure J funds, to break any ties. Projects that basically are being advanced by non-Measure J fund sources with little shortfall scored the highest in our list. You know, the criteria really favors projects that are ready and have the biggest amount of leveraged funds with the least amount of shortfall.
Can you move us to the current slide?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for letting me know.
Back a ways.
Thank you so much. Yes, we're now on this slide.
Thank you.
So moving on, the resulting scoring of the 13 projects is shown in attachment C in your packet if you want to see it, and they're summarized in this slide and next. And I just want to say, at this time, we're really only working on the top 5 projects on this list. And the reason we're doing that is because they're funded by other fund sources. And if we don't continue working on them, we'll end up losing other fund sources. Everything else basically is either inactive or was put on hold. And that's the continuation of the list, the 13 projects. We did not score the fully funded projects. You know, there are 5 of them at this time. We probably have another 2 in the next month or 2, the ADS grant, as well as the Iron Horse Trail, once we present to the board a fund exchange proposal. But these projects, we did not score them because, as you can see, they're either in construction or getting really close to construction. So there is really no point of stopping them at this time, or we can't actually stop them. And also we did not score the studies that we're undertaking at this time because we just didn't know what kind of projects they'll be recommending or what's the funding and cost information for these projects. So this is my last slide. Thank you for your patience. So we presented this item to the APC in the first week of September, and the APC recommended that we give the RTPCs an opportunity to review the ranked list. So this is an informational item at this time. We'll be happy to take your comments. We will come back to you in November and present to you the RTPC's comments along with hopefully an updated forecast of our Measure J revenue. So we will have some idea of how far we can go down these lists. And also at the same time, we have at least one fund exchange proposal we will be presenting to you in November, but we may have others. And if we get them, we will present them to you at that time. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Hisham. I just want to say to all of our staff, this is just so forward thinking and always looking out for making sure we stay completely solvent and protect our programs if at all possible. And this is really good to know. It's good advance warning. The other good news is the sales taxes are so far continuing to hold up pretty well, which is a whole lot better than we expected a few months ago. So let's hope that continues and everybody keep buying from Amazon and other places and spending money, and maybe we won't have a dip in all of this. So questions for Hisham? Luella.
I only have a comment, which is from everything I've heard, ironically, one of the biggest sources of continuing our sales tax are single driver vehicles, because everybody is thinking about not going back to. So it's good news and it's bad news. And
I think
we'll take the good news.
Not only not going back soon, but going by themselves when they do, which is going to mean if they go back, our freeways are a mess. So other questions, comments? This is an informational item. It will go to all of our RTPCs, so you get a chance to hear Hisham do this again. And I and the rest of the APC ask for this to come to the full board so we all have a heads up and can help guide those discussions as we take it back to our local cities. So if there are no other comments, I don't see anybody else waving a hand. So we will go on to our next action item, which will be presented by Matt Kelly to discuss the VMT mitigation program framework. Matt, you are up.
Thank you, Chair Pierce. Good evening, Authority members. Matt Kelly here, Senior Transportation Planner with the Authority. As most of you know, the Authority and Contra Costa's local agencies are right in the midst of implementing the shift in measuring traffic impacts from level of service to now VMT, vehicle miles traveled, due to changes in state law under SB 743. During discussions with our local planning directors and other local agency staff leading up to the implementation of SB 743, the Authority heard loud and clear the desire for a regional approach to mitigating VMT impacts. That idea was further fleshed out as part of the development of the March 2020 TEP and resulted in the inclusion of a VMT mitigation program in that plan. The concept of a countywide VMT mitigation program would support Contra Costa jurisdictions in their efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and implement land use decisions and transportation enhancements that would reduce reliance on single occupancy vehicles. A mitigation program would also benefit the Authority in its efforts to plan and construct improvements on the state highway system. So last October, Authority staff submitted a Sustainable Communities grant application to Caltrans in order to fund a study to develop a VMT mitigation program framework for Contra Costa. This past June, Caltrans announced an award of $400,000 to the Authority for this important effort. The grant scope of work, which is found in Attachment B, describes a program framework that would allow developers and institutions whose projects would lead to VMT increases to offset those increases through payment of fees toward or direct implementation of projects that would help lessen VMT in other parts of the county or among other populations. Because the TEP didn't pass in March, the development of a program was put on hold. However, this grant now allows CCTA to move forward, albeit on a slightly different schedule. Staff believes that the state and other regional agencies are very interested in this type of innovative program, and the Contra Costa program could end up being a model for mitigating VMT impacts from land use and transportation projects statewide. So we're really kind of setting the stage for a new paradigm here. Authority staff has been working with Caltrans to get the necessary forms submitted to allow for a restricted grant agreement between our two agencies in order to receive those funds. So approval of resolution 20-27G is the last item needed to submit in order to meet Caltrans's conditions. You can find that in attachment A. So once those conditions are met, the authority and Caltrans will enter into a funding agreement, and the authority will be authorized to go out and retain a qualified consultant to conduct the study, and that's expected to occur sometime late this year. So staff is very excited to begin working on this effort. This is going to require a collaborative effort between the authority's planning and projects departments, as well as with staff from all our local jurisdictions. So saying all that, staff's recommendation tonight is to adopt resolution 20-27G and authorize our executive director to execute a restricted grant agreement and any amendments thereto with Caltrans related to this study. Thank you for your time, and I can take any questions.
Thanks, Matt.
This is Romick. Move approval.
I have a motion from Romick.
I'll second. I had to ask you.
And a second from Hudson. Who has any questions?
It's a mute button, Luella.
Anybody have questions? This is a study. Hopefully it will give us lots of good information, and it will be relatively invisible to our public. So we won't have to take the political flack for anything until we know more. So that would be a good thing. Luella, did you want to say something?
Nope, I support it, and I'm hurrying us on to a vote.
Okay, then let's go ahead and call the roll, Terrian.
Commissioner Arnridge,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Yes.
Commissioner Glover,
Here,
Yes.
reaching for the button. There he goes.
Commissioner Haskew,
Yes.
Commissioner Hudson,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Romick,
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Geringer,
Yes.
Chair Pierce.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Terrian.
You're welcome.
Next items on the agenda are correspondence. I trust you have all read the letters in your packet and the associated committee reports. Dave?
You're too quick for me. Obviously, on the last item that we just passed, it's going to be very important to San Ramon. Some of you followed the appeal that we had on City Walk. Any meetings or anything that comes up where a member of the council or staff can be at, I'd really appreciate us being there, because the appeal is not going to be the last step. I'm fairly certain of that. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm assuming that we'll get regular updates as we go through this process. That would be wonderful. I get a thumbs up from Matt, so that's a good thing. Okay, I would just note for the record that Transpac did not meet in September, so don't think you're missing seeing a report, because we didn't have one. This is the time now for authority board and staff comments. Are there any members of the board who have comments?
LSA.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, I have no chair's report. So let's go to any of our ex officio representatives have a report. I see shaking heads all around. That's wonderful. Executive staff reports. Randy, you had 8 pages of stuff. My goodness, you're busier than when we don't have COVID.
Thank you. Yes.
LSA.
So that brings up a very, very good point. Wanted to thank the team for working from home. And when you start that process, it's kind of neat because it's different. But as you're isolated in your houses and it's hard to separate work from home because you're in the same facility, the same area so long that we try to break things up. We want our team to go on vacation or take a walk around the block. If you remember when you used to go to meetings, you used to get up out of your chair and maybe take Bart somewhere or walk to another office or go somewhere else by car, and it would take time between meetings. Now they're just stacked up one after the other. And so my concern as we move forward is are the mental aspects of working. So I'm really cognizant of trying to make sure that we all keep apprised of that situation. I did get invited. I say there's 14 experts and me. 15 people were invited to participate on a workshop, a three-session workshop sponsored by TRB, Transportation Research Board, and UC Berkeley and the Institute of Transportation Studies on post-COVID research needs. And so I was split up with 4 other people, one from Remix, it's a transit operator. Uber was on the panel as well. The California Transit Agency Association representative was there, and the state of Massachusetts. It was a very, very good dialogue about the short-term, midterm needs for research. And so hopefully in October, we'll get a report, we'll get a first copy. And so I'll share that with all of you on what's going to happen in the near future. But I think in our case, we're making the right investments. We're taking a look at the right things to do to bridge the short-term gap. One of the things that we'll bring to the board here in the near future is an assessment of refinancing our debt. So as you may know, interest rates are very low. And so Brian always has an eye on the interest rates with our financial advisor, K&N. And so we're going to come back probably to the board and take a look at refinancing those bonds. So that's in the short term. So while we have a problem with a pinch point where that debt service principal peaks up over that 42.5% line, we're going to try to bring that down through a refinancing. So hopefully we'll have good news for you then. Next week, I think we're going to get our first quarter sales tax receipts. And so we'll give you a better idea of how they match up to last year, because it's very, very confusing because of delayed payments, and it's more and more complex than it's ever been in the past. And so it's hard to make a good, solid projection, but we can make comparisons. But you got to take the good with the bad. In this case, we're like planning for the future, only it's near term. So that's what makes it difficult. And lastly, I'm proud to announce that CalCog every year goes out for a request for candidates for their leadership program. It's California Academy for Regional Leaders. CARL is the acronym. And we submitted two names, Lindsay Willis and Stephanie Hu, and they both were selected this year. So I think that's great news. They don't have to be far away from their families. They can do at least half of the sessions on Zoom or from their house. And so I think this is a golden opportunity to get those 2 fantastic people trained, and they'll get to hang out with other future leaders. And so I think this is great news. So congratulations to both of you. I'm glad you were selected, and hopefully as you learn, you'll share some of the tidbits with us, your teammates. So thank you. And that's really all I have, unless anybody has any questions.
Any questions of Randy? I would just add that the CARL program that CalCog put together and authorized has really been tremendous. We've had some folks from the region, particularly from MTC, who have gone through the program, and they said it was really invaluable in helping them learn how to be better executive leaders and really help them in their careers. And so it's also helping pay some of the bills for CalCog, which is a good thing. It helps keep our dues down, and that's a good thing. But working through CalCog and some of the other regions and sharing the work that we all do, you saw in Randy's report where we're working with Western Riverside Regional Council, and they have been doing a lot of really innovative stuff, and we've been collaborating together across the state. So it's a membership that I think is worth far more than what we pay into, because it maintains those partnerships across the state and helps keep us up to date on what's going on. So thank you, Randy, for supporting that. Congratulations to Lindsay and Stephanie. Maybe you'll get to host one of the sessions in Contra Costa again, and you'll actually be able to lead the group out to Gomentum and show them how we do paperless and all those kinds of great things. So with that, that was Randy's report. You have the calendar in your packet. And unless someone else has a burning issue, we are adjourned until our next meeting in October. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.